Hey everyone, welcome to Pipe to Grep Labs. Today I'm going to show you how to configure a Salt Master and Minion. So I'm SSH'd into two different boxes here. The one on the left is going to become my Salt Master, and the one on the right is going to become my Salt Minion. Before I get started, I just want to point out that I am running as root on both boxes, and that I'm also running Ubuntu 16.04 on both boxes. Alright, so let's get right into it. We're going to start with configuring the Salt Master. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and step you through by running each command you need manually. If you want to go back later down the road and script this into a bash script, I definitely recommend that, but for now I'm just going to go through everything manually. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is add the key for the SaltStack repo. And then the next thing we're going to do is add the repo for SaltStack. Alright, and then we're going to go ahead and just do an apt update so that our server knows about the new repo. Okay, at this point we're ready to go ahead and install the Salt Master. So it's going to be a simple apt install salt-master. Alright, we'll say yes. We'll go ahead and confirm that our Salt Master installed correctly. Do service salt master status. By default, as you see, Salt is installed as a service. Alright, now, so let's go ahead and move on to the Minion now. Minion, it's a very similar process. We're going to start by adding the key for the SaltStack repo. And then we're going to add the SaltStack repo itself. Okay, and then we're going to do an apt update. Okay, and next we're going to go ahead and install the Salt Minion itself. Apt install Salt Minion. I'll give it the tag Y to automatically say yes to the prompt. Now we do have some configuration to do on the Minion before it's ready and able to communicate with the masters. For that we're going to go into ets salt where all the configuration is. So you're going to see this file called Minion. This is the main Minion configuration file. So you can go ahead and use this if you want to set up all your config. I usually just use it to reference the config directives and to see some examples, because what you can also do is go into the minion.d directory, and then in here you can define your own config file that will go ahead and override the other Minion config file in the directory above it. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. So let's go ahead and create our own file, and let's just call it chewbacca.conf. Why not? You can name it whatever you want. It just has to have the .conf extension. So we're going to call it that. Alright, and now we're going to talk about a couple of the important directives that you need to set in order for the Minion to be able to talk to the master. So basically, the Salt Master is going to use two ports. It's going to use port 4505 TCP by default to send out commands to the Minion, and then it's going to use TCP 4506 to receive the results of those commands from the Minion. And so from the Minion's perspective, though, it's actually only concerned with one of those ports. But before we get into that, we'll go ahead first and define the master directive. So before we worry about the ports, first we need to give the Minion the IP of the master so that it knows how to get there. So I'll go ahead and double check the IP of the master here. So there it is. Alright, so you can also set this to the host name if you like, but of course you just have to have your DNS configured if you're going to do that. Alright, so master, we set that to the IP of our master. And then the other one is going to be master_port. Alright, now again, this is the port that the master receives commands on from the Minions. And by default, it's set to 4506. So we'll go ahead and do that since we didn't change it on the master and we're just running with the default for now. Alright, so we've got the master and the master port. So we'll go ahead and save this file. Now just restart the Salt Minion to update the config. if we've done everything correctly up to this point, the minion should have sent its key over to the master. So let's check on the master to see if it's there. So the command is salt-key, and then give it the big L. Okay, and you'll notice accepted keys, denied keys, and then unaccepted keys, and that's what we're interested here. And sure enough, we see this salt-minion-1. So let's go ahead and accept that key. It's going to be salt key tac A, and then we're going to put the minion ID -minion-1, and then just yes to confirm. Alright, and at this point we have now accepted the minion's key, and it appears in accepted keys. Another thing I want to talk about in regards to the minion is the minion ID. So let's go back one directory into etsalt, and you'll see this file called minion_id. So let's go ahead and VI into that. Alright, and this is the ID that your minion will report to your master with. By default, when you install Salt, it's going to set this value to whatever the host name is of your Ubuntu instance, but you can always customize this if you like. Now that we've accepted the key, we should have Salt connectivity to our minion. So let's go ahead and try it out. So the syntax is going to be Salt, and then within single quotes, you're going to want to put the minion ID. So salt-minion-1 in our example. And then we're going to run the test.ping module, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's going to run Salt's version of ping. Alright, and sure enough it returned true, so this confirms that we do have connectivity to our minion. While we're here, I just want to point out a couple other things. You can also use globs to match minions, so I'm going to go ahead and put the wildcard in, and it behaves similar to the Linux wildcard. This is actually going to match any minion ID. So if I had many minions, this would ping all of them. In this example, of course, I only have one minion though, so it's effectively the same as specifying the minion ID itself. You can also use the command.run module to run shell commands from the master. So it's going to be command.run, and then within single quotes, type whatever command you want to run on the minion as if you were typing it from a shell on the minion itself. So we'll do ifconfig as an example, and sure enough, back on the minion, if I run ifconfig manually, you'll see that the output is the same. At this point, you now have a fully functioning Salt Master and minion, but before we go here, I want to show you the inner workings of the publish and return ports in Salt. So we're going to go back on the master here to the etsalt directory. We're going to go to the master.d directory, and we're going to create a config file of our own, similar to like we did on the minion. So I'm just going to call this one master2.conf. Alright, and in here I'm going to manually specify the publish port and the return port, which is actually just return RET port. Okay, so the publish port, like I touched on earlier, is going to be the port that Salt uses to put commands out for the minions. So let's go ahead and set this one just to 443. Again, it's normally 4505 by default. Alright, and the return port, let's go ahead and set this to 80. And a configuration like this could actually be helpful sometimes in production environments, because say your minion is on a different network segment than your master, and say it needs to go through a firewall, you'd have to open up port 4506, which is normally the return port on your firewall, in order for your minion to be able to get through to the master. But generally, a port like, say, port 80 is probably open already on your firewall, and so you could just set the return port to port 80 on your Salt Master, and then you should be good to go, and you should be able to get through that firewall. So let's go ahead and save that, and we're going to go ahead and restart the master here. this salt master restart so that we update the config. So let's go ahead and configure the minion now. Before we do that, I'll just cat our master comp file so we can see those settings. So on the minion, let's go back into our minion.d directory and back into our configuration file. Alright, and I do want to mention that I set this master port directive earlier to 4506. I actually didn't need to do that because by default on the minion it will be set to 4506, but I wanted to just go ahead and explicitly define it just so you get in the habit of that, and so that we can go ahead and customize it now. So the master port on the minion is going to need to be set to reflect the return port on the master. So let's go ahead and do that. So on the master, the return port is set to 80. So we're going to need to set the master port over here to 80 because, again, this is the port that the minion targets when it sends traffic back to the master. So let's go ahead and save this and restart the minion. Alright, so what I've done is I started a couple more SSH sessions into my master, and on this top window I started a dump. Don't worry, I'm not taking a dump. That sounds a little funny, doesn't it? But anyway, I started a dump on port 443. Alright, and then on the bottom window I started another dump. I should probably stop saying that, but you know, it just seems to work, on port 80. And so what should happen here is I should see traffic outgoing out of port 443 when I run a salt command, and then I should see traffic coming back to the master at port 80. So let's go ahead and run a salt command. We're just going to do a test.ping again. Sure enough, the minion returned, and then sure enough, out here we've got some action. You can see at first here the master went ahead coming from 443, sent out to the minion, and then back down here we see the minion sent some return traffic back to the master, alright, at port 80.